you for everybody for coming. We have a lot of different people, a lot of different things going on. I will say that there will be some natural breaks in between every section that we do, and maybe if we can hold our questions to one of those breaks, and so that way we'll get everything going. All council members are present, and we have one item on our agenda, and it is the formation of a library capital facilities area. So I am going to have some introductions. So we're going to start with Kurt, and we're going to go all the way around and all the way there. And please state your name and so we know who you are and maybe what you do or where you're from. Very good.
I'm Barbara Botetto.
Cindy Hochstetter.
My name's Earl Stewart.
Charlotte Newman.
Pat Cole.
Patrick Reed.
Nisha Patel. A little bit lonely here.
Rounding out the in-person, I'm Gretchen Casserati, the Executive Director of Pierce County Libraries.
Okay, so let's have online introduce yourself and then we'll.
I'm Abby Sloan. Sorry, Nisha, that you're there by yourself. I would have tried to be there in person.
And I'm Pat Jenkins. Again, just like Abby, I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person tonight, but just like I'm grateful for the opportunity to be partnering with the city on this project. I'm also very happy to have this opportunity tonight.
Thank you, everybody. My name is Jason Wilson. I'm the Sumner City Administrator. From a housekeeping standpoint, just a couple things. For those of us that are participating in this conversation here tonight in the room, you do need to use your mic. Otherwise, the people that are attending online will not be able to hear you. So make sure we all are using good mic practices. Restrooms, for those of you who aren't familiar with the building, are out this door. There's 2 sets, both in the hallway. There's also water out there if anybody gets thirsty.
We are, okay. Hello, I'm Matt Elfs, partner at Building Work. We're architects who've been working with the Pierce County Library on some planning work, and we're going to present tonight.
And I'm Kate Ryland, also a partner at Building Work.
I'm Dan Gottlieb, a partner at Hillis Clark Martin and Peterson, and I'm a bond lawyer here to tell you about the legal requirements for an LCFA.
All right, thank you. I think we'll get on with our presentation. We'll, Jason, go ahead.
Thanks. I'm actually going to turn it over to Gretchen Casserati, but we're going to get the presentation pulled up. It'll take just a moment.
Thank you. Thanks. Okay, so appreciate everyone carving out time on schedules to make this study session happen. And also really want to send a verbal appreciation here to Jason. He and I have worked very closely on how to approach a lot of content for everyone to hear and to consider before we take the next steps in a process for considering how to fund a new library here in Sumner. So while we have one agenda item, we did try to break it out into some categories, as Mayor mentioned. And so we'll take some natural breaks where we can ask some questions as we move through a lot of content this evening. So just to sort of set the stage for the benefit of everyone to kind of regroup now that we're in a new year, I did come to the council in December and shared an update on the library's plans, our planning status, as well as what our thinking was for the best way to approach how to construct a new library for Sumner. And since then, we have continued to work with our architects, Building Work, joining us this evening. We have prepared conceptual work. We have a public website with information that's gone live. We have public polling underway and some engagement activities that our architects have been helping us with since I came to visit you in December. So we have jump-started our process and fulfilling our timelines as we hit January this year, and continuing on our timeline for those efforts into March. A recap of the site, we worked with the city of Sumner for a number of years ago to identify a new property opportunity, which is right back on Main Street across from the Fred Meyer in the heart of downtown, or in downtown, closer to residents, closer to schools, a little bit more of a walkable, bikeable area for the residents back in town. We had worked a number of years ago, you might notice the date on this from 2018, but preliminary work was done when we were considering the parcel, working with the staff here as well to ensure the suitability of that site. And what we concluded with our architects is that the site would accommodate a building up to 20,000 square feet. So we have not designed the building. Should we receive the approved funding for a capital project, we would follow a traditional process of having an RFP. We would have public engagement through the actual design of the actual building. The parcel is 1.67 acres. What we are anticipating is a branch of up to 20,000 square feet would have dedicated spaces for children, teens, seniors, and families. We'd have meeting and study rooms in a branch of that size. We've been working really closely with community partners to expand some services to the community and have a community space for delivering those services in the branch. This would be a site for our Pierce County Law Library. And we would have certainly efforts to make sure this building was designed for accessibility beyond ADA accommodation or requirements, as well as environmental design of energy efficient modern libraries. This was a table of some estimates that I brought to you in December. In looking at current construction costs, we have done an internal review since December to test our assumptions. We looked at recently finished library construction projects in Washington as well as outside of Washington that either are completed or have gone to bid. Most have been coming in with very high construction costs, not probably a surprise to most folks. That is driven by a lot of different factors beyond labor shortages. We're experiencing supply chain issues, interest rates, a lot of different factors impacting construction. But right now what we're seeing is an estimated cost of $950 per square foot up to $1,000 is what is a final building project. So that would include construction, the architects and engineering services, FF&E, which would be all the fixtures, furnishings, and equipment, the collections, sort of an all-in number. And that's what we looked at before. We are continuing to work through what kinds of funding we have to bring to the table now. The library has a future libraries fund. So we anticipate and would work with the board to finalize an amount, but committed to bringing at least $1 million from our cash reserves. We also have a wonderful foundation that has been working on a $3 million capital campaign and has been able to receive commitments of about 1.5 to date. We have right now a request in and a recommendation in the Library Capital Improvement Program from the Washington State Legislature. And then if we add all of those numbers together, we're kind of in a range. And so depending on what is decided for the full size of a library branch, we can make an estimation of what would be required from a public funding of what's left to fund a project. Our assumptions, which we'll talk later about, have led us to run some scenarios, and we'll share those numbers with you a little bit later this evening. I think I've covered everything there. So we're looking at anywhere from 5 to 7 million that we can bring to the project right from the get-go. And that leads us to our first guest this evening, who can talk us through a little bit more of the specifics of what a library capital facility area is from a statutory perspective, as well as the process, should the governing bodies decide to proceed with using this tool to fund the bulk of a capital project for a library in Sumner. So this would be when we could have our attorney Dan Gottlieb join us as a panelist.
I
And
think
Dan,
I think I'm already signed up.
all right.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Good. So right now, in the absence of a library capital facility area, if the Pierce County Library System wanted to issue bonds to finance a new library in Sumner, it would have to tax all of the residents of the entire library district to build this one local library. And if it wanted to do voter approved bonds, which is really what would make the most sense, since the non-voter approved bonds for libraries are limited in amount and must be paid from the library's general funds, which are barely enough to pay for operations. Then it would be looking to get a vote from all those people. And that's turned out to be in most library districts an impossibility. So you'll see the legislative purpose that's here. I'll emphasize that the legislature found it to be the best in the best interests of the people to establish library capital facility areas as quasi-municipal corporations and independent taxing units existing within the boundaries of existing library districts for the purpose of financing the construction of library capital facilities. The point is to carve out a small portion or an appropriate portion of what would otherwise be the library district, overlay a new taxing district on top of that, and use that as the basis for convincing the local patrons that and getting their approval to tax themselves and build a new library capital facility. This process was first embodied in statute in 1995 because it posed an interesting constitutional question. It was put to the state Supreme Court in a what we call a test case, a validation action, and the concept was validated by the court. Since then, I'm familiar with 12 of them around the state. There's at least 6 or 7 in Snohomish County. There were 2 in King County. They're both now gone, having finished their tasks. There were 2 in Clark County. They're also now, well, one of them is gone. The other one I think is still going. There was one in Kitsap County, one in Benton County. I believe there was one in Spokane County, although I worked on all the others. I didn't work on the one in Spokane County, so I can't vouch for that. The process is initiated by the Library District Board of Trustees. They would adopt a resolution that would request the Pierce County Council to put on the ballot a single proposition that has 2 parts. One part is to form the library capital facility area, and the other part is to authorize it to incur indebtedness and levy excess property taxes to pay for a library capital facility. Those two propositions used to be separate. The statute used to require separate propositions, and that's since been merged. If the voters approve that, then the LCFA could incur up to 1.25% of the value of the taxable property in the LCFA in debt. I'm assuming, though I haven't seen any numbers to justify that the $19 million that we've been talking, I'm sorry, the $14 million we've been talking about here fits within that 1.25%. The request needs to include certain information, the proposed boundaries of the LCFA, and I know that's a discussion for later on tonight. A copy of a resolution from any city or town that's located in whole or in part within the proposed boundaries, and that resolution should approve the creation of the LCFA and agree on how election costs are to be paid. My understanding is that the library district intends to pay those costs, so that agreement should be relatively easy for the city. To be successful, then the voters, this is like any voted bond measure, it would have to be approved by 60% of the voters voting at an election at which at least 40% of the number of voters who voted in the last general election have voted. And there's a chart that explains that later on in your materials. If the voters approve the ballot proposition, then the LCFA would need to be organized. The state law says that the LCFA governing body would be 3 members of the county council selected by the entire county council. I can tell you from experience that most county council members have no idea that's coming when it happens to them. So it takes a certain amount of education for those folks to understand their duties as the governing body of the LCFA. They would then get together and organize themselves and pass bylaws, elect officers, and our suggestion would be, and this is what's happened in all the LCFAs I'm familiar with, enter into a contract, an interlocal agreement with at least the library district to have the library district serve as its agent to undertake all the activities of the LCFA in the development of the proposed library capital facility, including engaging architects, engaging contractors, engaging council, doing all the things that would need to happen, running the agency. So all of the treasury function, not the treasury functions, but all of the economic functions, financial functions would be initiated by the district as the agent of the LCFA. The LCFA would typically pick the county treasurer to serve as its treasurer, as most special districts do. And then it would, with the help of the library district, construct the library. And the library district would contract to operate it for the term of the bonds, at which point the LCFA would vote to dissolve itself and transfer ownership wherever the agreements that it has require. I think in this case, probably my presumption would be that they would transfer ownership back to the library district as the owner of the property. And the library district would continue to operate the library on into the future after that. The timeline for this in 2023 is getting kind of short. If you want to put this on the ballot in August, the deadline for the receipt by the county auditor of the county council resolution is May 12th, 2023. That means that the library district's resolution and the city's resolution would have to be adopted before that and provided to the county council in enough time for them to consider them and put them on, put the proposition on the ballot. If that proposition were to fail in August and you wanted to get on the November election, the deadline for the November election is inconveniently the same day as the primary election, so you won't really know the results at that point. I understand that the county auditor has been willing to accept duplicate sets of resolutions requesting having these put on the ballot. One, they would be identical except for the ballot. So you'd submit one for the primary, you'd submit one for the general election that is contingent, if you will, upon the failure at the primary, and that way you will have met the deadline. So that's one way to get around that. Otherwise, you'd have to wait till 2024 or not put it on again ever. I'm happy to answer questions about that process, either now or later in the session.
Do we have any questions? Go ahead, Cindy.
I just need a little bit of help understanding what the Pierce County Council does with the 3 members. I guess I got confused between what the library district facilitates as far as the money and what the council, Pierce County Council was going to do.
So the Pierce County, not the council appoints three of its members to serve as the LCFA governing body. Everything the LCFA does once it's formed has to be approved or authorized by its governing body. I didn't mention, I should have, I skipped right over it, that the most important thing the LCFA does is sells bonds. So after it organizes itself and works with and adopts an arrangement, an agreement, an interlocal agreement with the library district to undertake the library development process, the next thing that happens is the LCFA will, through its agents, arrange to offer and sell bonds to finance the project. And the 3 county council members who are its governing body will need to approve that bond sale. One of those members will be elected president, and he or she will sign the bonds, as will the secretary selected from among the other 2 members. So they're the governing body of this independent taxing authority that really has only one function, which is to sell bonds and build a library. Did that
Thank you.
help?
Yeah.
Do we have any others? Any other questions? Go ahead.
Hi, my question relates to the costs. So right now, the 14 million that the library is thinking about, including in the bond, is based on the estimated 950. So if those costs increase significantly, is the bond still locked into that 14 million, or is there any room for adjusting it within a certain period of time?
To the extent that the voters vote on 14 million, the LCFA would be stuck with the 14 million as what it could get from bond sales. That would mean that if the cost of the library goes up, the parties would have to turn to other sources of funding to make up the difference. So the foundation, an increase in state funding, an increase in direct funding from the library district. Or anywhere else you could get it.
Anybody else? Oh, go ahead, Earl.
Thank you for the explanation so far. It's a little confusing.
I'm sorry.
I'm questioning a couple of things that are on this slide right here. Point number, I understand interlocal agreements, I understand bond sales And it was a good point that this woman pointed out that if the cost or the amount sold is less than what was needed, then we'd have to make up the difference. My attention is drawn to point 6, when the bonds are repaid, the LCFA dissolved. What's the estimated time for repayment?
Typically, these have been set up for 20 years. That is one of the items that needs to actually be in the ballot proposition. So before the ballot proposition is submitted to the voters, this group, the library district and the city, should come to agreement on the term of the bond issue. Statutorily, it could be as long as 40 years, although that's never been anything any library has wanted to do. 20 years seems to be a pretty common time frame. There's no, other than that 40-year limit, there's no requirement that it be a certain period of time.
Okay, 20 years is quite a while. I understand municipal bonds could go for a long time, but in this case, when you have members of a Pierce County Council being on this group, subject to term limits and losing elections, how does that work with replacing them during that 20-year period?
That's a really good question. One of the first things the LCFA governing body will be asked to do is to adopt a set of bylaws. And those bylaws will describe how the members of the LCFA governing body will go on and off the board when their term is essentially coextensive with the term that they're on the county council. And if they go off the county council for any reason, the rest of the county council would appoint someone to replace them.
Okay, I figured that would probably be the case. My concern is that at 20 years, you could have a revolving door on this group, some of whom may not really care too much about this situation, and it just seems like a very almost too flexible of a situation.
Well, once the bonds have been issued, there is and an interlocal agreement is already in effect. There is nothing more for the LCFA governing body board members to do except once a year meet to authorize the levy for the repayment of the bonds. The only other thing that's left for them to do is to dissolve themselves when the bonds are paid off.
Okay. And the bond issue would be strictly for construction funds. Is that correct?
In this case, yes, it'd be construction, and I haven't actually heard whether the library wants to include furnishings and collection as part of what they're paying for, but it could be used for that.
Okay, and then one last question. Just ballpark, how much would it cost for a ballot to be put together and go on this item, go on the ballot?
I don't have enough information to answer that question. Maybe someone else knows how much it costs to put something on the ballot in the city of Sumner. It's some share of what the total cost of the election is. Presumably there are other things on the ballot in the primary, and if you need to, the general election, and you're sharing that pro rata with everyone else on the ballot.
Okay, thank you.
Gretchen, go ahead.
Thanks. Yes, our business and compliance director did research that, and our estimations at this point are it could be as little as $2,500, $3,000 for thousand. Excuse me, that's a big comma difference. I couldn't sign that from this far. So, but we did include that in our budget for the 2023 budget year as we were developing that. We were working on this project as well. So the library at this time has budgeted the appropriate funds working with the county based on the numbers for our for the possible precincts to be considered. Thank you, Cliff.
Councilmember Newman, did you have a question? Okay, Councilmember Cole.
My question is very similar to the one asked by Ms. Patel, and that is just sort of the opposite. What if, the measure passes and $14 million is collected, but some miracle happens and the library only needs 12 million to complete the construction? Then what happens with that additional 2 million?
Well, there are two choices in that case. If the library capital facility area knows before it issues the bonds that it's not going to need 14 million and only needs 12 million, the voters voted for 14, the project comes in at 12, then there's nothing binding the LCFA to issue all 14 million. The ballot proposition is always written to approve a maximum principal amount, not a flat principal amount. If in fact the cost of the project isn't known at that point, but it comes in under budget after the bonds are issued, the excess bond proceeds would be used to reduce the levies in the future.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead.
And if I may add on to that, in my experience with other building projects, the value engineering part of a process will also allow us to adjust the project if we need to. So if we see major increases in doors and windows, we might have the ability to choose a different product that's less expensive. So there's some ability to control costs as we move through a value engineering phase. So that's another advantage on the owner's side to be able to make adjustments.
Sad to say, I've told you I've worked on many of these, and none of these projects have come in under the maximum amount.
Councilmember Reed.
Thank you, Mayor. And I think my question might be for Dan. So in relation to the interlocal agreement, so if the taxing district for the Sumner Library were to go beyond Sumner city limits, then you would have to get an interlocal agreement or a council approval from the neighboring jurisdictions as well?
No, if let me see if I can restate the question. Were you assuming that it would go beyond Sumner boundaries into other incorporated cities or towns?
That's what I wasn't sure. That's kind of where I was going with the question would the bonds typically, or the area typically be restricted to just the city limits, folks?
It's not restricted to the city limits, but any city that has even a small portion of their territory within the LCFA would need to join in this process just as you are and adopt a resolution approving the LCFA. I believe, I'm not an expert in Pierce County geography, but I believe that none of the maps that are under consideration include anything other than incorporated Sumner and unincorporated Pierce County.
Okay, and that's kind of where my question was going, because although it's great, but I also see a lot of it becoming kind of a destination use item too, especially with all the pass through that we have to other communities. But I understand the complexity of trying to cross borders and trying to draw money from another city for your own development. But I was curious if that was the intent the whole time, was to put it primarily on the city of Sumner and the surrounding unincorporated area.
I believe that's the case.
Dan, this is Jason from City of Sumner. Just a follow-up question that might help my council out. Have you seen, or is it possible for the Pierce County Council or the whatever county that an LCFA is in to appoint members of the local city council as part of the LCFA board?
No, it's specifically not authorized by statute. Okay. They're required to appoint only members of their own council. And in fact, in the majority of the counties of the state, what passes for their governing body is a 3-member board of commissioners. So actually, in all those counties, all 3 commissioners become the LCFA governing body.
Thank you for clarifying.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Dan has worked with the Pierce County Libraries for a number of years and with, I believe it was 40 years of experience working in government and municipal financing. We appreciate all that expertise, particularly on these new tools, new to us tools like the LCFA. Next up, the architects that the library has been working with for a number of years introduced themselves a little earlier here, Kate and Matt from Building Work. And they're going to talk us through some of the contemporary trends in public design so that you can kind of get an idea of what is happening and what a new library could look like, what we're seeing in terms of those design features. So thank you, Matt and Kate, for joining us.
Great, thank you for having us. I hope you can all hear us okay. As I said, my name is Matt and this is Kate. We're an architecture firm based in Seattle. We specialize in public library design, and we've been working on public libraries for over 20 years. Recently, we've designed libraries in Pierce County for the Pierce County Library System, in Kitsap County, King County, Snohomish County, and Skagit County. We're also working on some libraries in Central and Eastern Washington as well. During the course of this work, we have developed some thinking, talking with all of our library clients and library patrons about the general direction of public library design, which we want to share with you tonight, just for a discussion. Next slide. So we think there's so many ways to think about public libraries. They're so special in our communities, but there's 3 general categories of design ideas that we think contemporary library design is about. First, equity, making sure that the library, is warm and welcoming to everyone. Access, the libraries provide access to a whole range of services, not just books, but spaces and places for people to gather and to really be in our communities. And then inspiration, the libraries are a place of inspiration, inspiration of ideas, inspiration about our communities, about the environment, a whole range of ideas and interests are come together in libraries. Next slide. That's you.
Yeah. So a little bit about how equity, access, and inspiration are translated to buildings. And we will have pictures because we are architects and that's what we do. But the ideas of natural light and views in the spaces and how does that help the well-being of the people using those spaces, both staff who are there all day and community members who come in and out of the libraries. Healthy buildings created from sustainable materials, accessible buildings, as Matt mentioned, it's about every thought that goes into the building. How do people approach it? How are people using the building? What are the chairs like? What are the tables like? How do these elements cater to people of all sizes, shapes, and abilities? Visible spaces, that's sort of 2 things. One, the library should be a center point of a community. You should be able to see it and say, I'm welcome there. This is an awesome part of my community. And then also from the point of view of library staff, being able to see throughout the library, to see different activities going on in the space and for safety and for the ability to work with the patrons as they need help. Flexible spaces, that's something we're really seeing. Library services are changing a lot currently, especially with shifts to digital and other sort of things. So how can we make a building that will serve the community for years and decades to come? And then spaces to sit, to gather, to learn and play. How do you create an environment where all of these actions and all of these ways of coming together are really welcoming and really available to everyone using the space?
Next slide. we're going to talk you through real briefly some pictures of 3 different library projects that we've worked on. Kate's going to talk about this one. It's in South King County, a second one in South King County, and then a library we just completed up in Skagit County.
Yeah. So the unique feature of this library is that it already existed when we were brought on board to rethink it. So really the library was built in the early 1970s. And then the question becomes, how do we transform this space to meet the library needs and functions of today? So this is the existing condition. This is not our work. Next slide. And as you can see here, there's a few elements that are really identifying this library in our mind as something of the 1970s. There's not a lot of windows. There's pretty limited natural light coming in from one overhead clerestory. The focus in here is really on the bookshelves. It's really on the books and the materials of the library. And what this community was finding is that what their community really needed was a space for people to be. There wasn't really anywhere else to go in this community. There wasn't a Boys and Girls Club or a YMCA or some of these elements that exist in other places. The library was the hub for folks in this community. So this is the before. The next slide will be the after. So same view from where we were standing, and a couple of major changes that we made to this space. First, on the left-hand side of the screen, what was an enclosed meeting room that could be reserved as sort of a private space, we literally took the walls off of. We installed some big glass sliding doors into this area so that it really expanded the usable space in the library. It's pretty small. It's only about a 5,000 square foot building. And so this allowed that extra meeting room space that was often sort of closed and underused to be part of the bigger library space and used by folks in programming throughout the day. And then also you'll see on the right that we removed a lot of structure to hold up some fluorescent lights that really sort of dropped the feel of the space. So removing all of that and bringing in some LED fixtures, some lighter lighting, if that makes sense, some smaller pieces, we were able to open the ceiling back up and really give this idea of volume within the space. Next slide. Here's that same sliding door from a different view, and really its relationship to the children's area. It's often used for story times and for programming, especially in the kids area, which allows more space for people, which is really what they were looking for in this branch. Next slide. Here we have another before, and again, looking at this image, it really was about how many books could be stored in this library facility. Anymore with digital holds and the transfer of materials between library branches, the goal, which is visible in the next slide here, was to really clear out space for people and to clear out space for more technology. In this slide, you can see we've more than doubled the number of public computer stations in this library. They kind of run down the spine on the left. And then in the center, we basically took all of the books that were here and pushed them against the perimeter walls, which you'll remember did not have windows. So therefore, they were really great opportunities to use as storage in the library for books. And then we were able to open a couple new windows in the space. You can see the one here on the left of the teen area that is a new window out to the surrounding area. The other thing that we were able to provide in this library, were a couple small study rooms. We found that folks, groups of 2 or 3, were needing to get together and have a place where they could study or work on homework or meet to do taxes or so many of these civic services that our libraries offer that might be disturbing to folks in the middle of the open space. And so we were able to provide 2 additional study rooms, even in this small library. Great. And then again, a view from the other side, looking back across the space, really open, really bright, really looking at how to make the space as flexible as possible to accommodate programming, despite the 4 walls already being there.
Next slide. This is a new construction library that we completed a few years ago in South King County in the Skyway neighborhood. At the top was the original Skyway library that again was built in the late 1960s, and the bottom is an image of the new library that we constructed I think it's opened about 7 years ago. Next slide. One of the things in working with the community, we held an extensive public outreach process, both with our client, the King County Library System, and members of the community. And we had several events open houses and discussions. And one of the things that we heard from the community was that they really wanted to place a central place in the commercial district where people could gather for a whole range of activities, a place to meet after school, a place to study, a place for seniors. And so we really wanted to create a public plaza that led to this library. And we incorporated art, which you see in the foreground here, seating, and then sort of a big grand sort of welcoming entrance to the new library. Next slide. We also heard from the community that they wanted a library that was different, that didn't look like a bank or didn't look like a retail store. They wanted something that they felt they could think of as their own representing Skyway. We had a triangular site, so we ended up with some strange geometry. And then we were starting to think about Skyway. And again, this goes to how do libraries become particular or unique for each community? In this case, we're near one of the Renton Boeing plant. And so there was thinking about aviation, we're thinking about the sky, and we ended up coloring the building in these dark blues that sort of blend in with the sky at dusk. And that was an idea that we put forward that resonated with folks. And so it became one of the ways that this building is kind of a special place that everyone recognizes in their community. Next slide.
And one of the great things about this library is during the day, it's really bold color stands out. And then in the evening, the skin outside of the library sort of fades away and you can see everything happening inside. And since nighttime comes at 4 o'clock for half our year, we really made this big community room out at the prow where we had just seen the exterior view of this. And it included, as a nod to our community, a study table, which is shown on the right-hand side here. It's actually constructed of a 17-foot long tail wing that we pulled from the Boeing salvage surplus down the street. And so that was just one of the ways that we were trying to work with the community and hear like, what do you identify with here? What are the things that really make Skyway Skyway? And how can we start to work those into the architecture? Next slide. Here again, we have an opportunity where we included a study room, which we find are really helpful for folks, especially if they're doing more digital meetings and things like that, as well as the collections in the space. We also have a lot of examples in this image of ways to absorb sound. And so that's one of the things, right? Where you have a space that's well loved and well used. We did incorporate sound absorption materials on ceilings, on walls, on the floor to really make this a space where it wasn't a challenge to folks to have a lot of people there. It was still functional for groups as they would come into this area. Next slide. And the really great thing about starting a library from the ground up is it can be whatever we can dream, right? So we have high ceilings, we have lots of light in this particular branch to focus even more on flexibility. The floor that you see is actually 12 inches above the structural floor, and that's where all of our power and our data and our air for the space runs, so that as things change, as collection needs change and things like that, it's a really flexible, open space where things can move, things can adapt, and it can grow with the community of Skyway as their needs do. And then the meeting room. This was a big conversation for folks in this community. The teens in Skyway used this space a lot. And so we made a lot of choices. This window looks out toward the junior high and middle schools in the area. There's a very long counter that has lots of plugs, so you can sit there and work on your laptop and look out the window, but they also spread out snacks every day after school, because this is where a lot of kids go to get their after school snack and hang out with their friends. And we did provide the infrastructure so they could have dueling video games in this branch, because that was their big thing, 2 screens going at once. And so things like that, just understanding the feedback of the community and what folks are looking for in a space that you know and call their own.
And then the third library that we'll talk briefly about is a library we just completed up in Skagit County in the town of LaConner. And this library is really unique to this particular place and to the partnership that was formed between LaConner Regional Library, the town of LaConner, and the Swinomish Indian tribal community. Next slide. LaConner is a historic district. So this library looks very, very different from other libraries, which I think just underscores the point that a library building should be unique in particular and should resonate with this particular community. Here we have historic district, so the library used wood siding, the shape and the form of the library was responding to historic buildings that are in the district. And then the library also, like I said, partnered with the Snohomish Indian tribal community. And so we incorporated native art. There's a story pole carved by a local master carver. And we actually redesigned the part of the building to create a backdrop for that story pole. The library is renamed the LaConner Snohomish Library. And it's sort of a representation of different community elements, in this case, the tribal community and the town coming together to create a community resource for everyone. Next slide. Here we have a very large bay window that becomes a focal point for the reading room. And this window looks out towards the main drag as you're coming into town. You can go sit here and read a paper, or read a book and see who's coming and going. The library also focused on the use of mass timber, in this case, cross-laminated timber. And that actually came from the library district, an interest in using mass timber. And we were able to secure some grant funding, both from the state and from other sources, to create a demonstration project that made the most of mass timber, this emerging construction technology that really makes sense in Washington State. Next slide. We also work, in addition to incorporating native culture and native art, we work with other aspects of the community. And LaConner is a maritime town and has a history with the waterfront. And so we created this tugboat, which is really, it's sort of a low wall that defines a children's area, but it was a way of making it really unique, both in terms of speaking to the history of the town of LaConner, but creating something really fun and special for the children that identifies the children's area. So they see this hull of the tugboat, and then when they walk around, they can sit inside the boat for story time and to read books. Next slide. And here's another shot from the inside. So the tugboat elements on the right, and then we have these sort of reading nooks on the left that it's kind of fun, like you're on the inside of a boat. And the kids really love this, and parents too. It's a place where they can sit. You can sit with your child, read a book, or kids can work together in small groups. I think
And it really is about creating sort of this space where you feel safe, even though it's a big, again, an open space, one that's flexible that could change in the future.
So again, I think that concludes our presentation, but thinking about equity, thinking about access and inspiration, and how libraries can serve a whole range of contemporary needs that are looking to the future, but also how can the building and the space be something that resonates with a particular community. I think that's the last slide we had for you tonight.
Thank you. Michelle. No? Okay, so Barbara, go ahead.
So Sumner Rotary has raised 10% of the foundation fundraising for a multi-service center. And the idea is to have space for agencies from Tacoma to come to Sumner like once or twice a week, and have their office space in Sumner, because transportation is a problem. So how would you envision incorporating something like that in a library?
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic question. And some of the ways we've done it in the past, every case is different, but we have had opportunities where there are a series of study rooms or meeting rooms or other appropriately sized areas that could be used as a touchdown space for an organization like that on certain days. On other days, those could be opened up and be used or reserved for small group meetings, or we have a quilters club at one library who meets there. And really just thinking about how every space in the library can be accessed and will benefit the greater group. Also lockable storage, right? That's a really good thing that we put into libraries a lot, where maybe there's different cabinets that are assigned to different groups, and they have some areas where they can pull out materials, set them up, and then tuck them back away safely.
Yeah, thanks. That's it's something that has to be in our library. So.
Councilmember Reed.
Thank you, Mayor. My question is, first of all, some of these samples and concepts are amazing. I really love it. The one question I had though was on cross laminated timber. I had a briefing on that a couple years ago about its many uses and how great of a product it is, but that the price is about 3 to 4 times the normal cost because of availability. Is that still the case, or has that changed in recent couple years?
It has changed, and I would say in this library, the Locarno Sonomish Library, was probably one of our lower cost projects. And it was a public bid project. The numbers came in at about $3.5 million. This is a 5,400 square foot library, so it's a small library. But we were able to really focus on cost efficiency. And the CLT there are some cost benefits to it. First of all, we designed the library to take the maximum, most efficient use of CLT. So we were able to reduce or eliminate secondary structural elements. So in this photo, you see these large steel trusses on the overhead. That's the only other structure in the building besides CLT. So all the walls and all the roof elements are CLT. And so by working with our engineers and the CLT manufacturing company to really optimize that, we were able to eliminate other structural elements. We also found that CLT has other cost benefits. This building, the walls and the roof went up in about 3.5 days. Once the CLT arrived on site, it really goes up, it's just like a 3-dimensional puzzle. And so they had a crane, they erected this building in about 3.5 days. Whereas if they had traditional stick framing, it could easily have taken a month or 6 weeks, many times that time. So there are efficiencies. And then I think the big issue is competition among CLT manufacturers. And that's increasing as more CLT manufacturing comes online. And we have manufacturing in Oregon, state of Washington, and also in British Columbia right now. So I think it's getting better. And like I said, we were able to use it really efficiently for this small building.
And I think the other benefit of it that we just decided to embrace on this project is we didn't cover it up with other finishes. So if you have a stud wall, then you put drywall and you tape it, and you paint it, and there's like 8 steps. We said, okay, this is the structure, it is the finish. We're going to see some exposed conduit and some other things, but that's going to be part of the story of how this works. And so again, there are cost savings in some areas, even if the upfront cost of the CLT as a number looks a little surprising.
And that's great. I think it's an amazing product. It was just unfortunate that there were not very many manufacturers of it in comparison to the need. So thank you.
Yeah, it's getting better. This CLT was manufactured by Vaughan, which is outside of Spokane. But there were other CLT companies, I think one in Oregon bid on it. And they really thought of this as a demonstration project where, people can look at this building and say, okay, the whole building essentially is built out of CLT. What does it take to do that?
All right, Deputy Mayor
Thank you.
Hochstetter. Go ahead.
There was a little birdie whispering in my ear. So what is the CLT lumber?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, sorry for using an acronym. It stands for cross-laminated timber. The broader term is mass timber, and it's a new construction technology that's really taking off in the Pacific Northwest. So instead of building with individual sticks of wood, like a 2x4 or a 2x8, you're laminating together pieces of wood to create a very large structural element for a wall or a roof. So in this case, these pieces were 16 feet long by up to 8 feet wide, pre-manufactured in a factory and then shipped to the site. So it's really effective as a sustainable design strategy in terms of carbon sequestration. It also really works well with our timber industry. You're able to use younger trees that are grown for this purpose, and then it creates good jobs manufacturing this stuff. So it really, I think, is a really innovative technology that is positive in a lot of ways.
Thank you for your explanation on that, because I actually had no idea what it was either, but it looks beautiful up. I want to say that I am very happy that you have been selected to work on this project. I'm really impressed with the the styles and the open use of the library that you've been able to design and the colors and all that. I'm really hoping that we can get that far, that we can have a beautiful building like this too. I guess one question I had is how hard is it to involve the tribes? Is that something that we could look at also in your experience?
Yes, I think it's a great idea. I think the more members of any community that can be brought into the process, the better. In the case of La Conner, the Swinomish Indian tribal community was approached as a partner, and that tribal community was able to actually were one of the major sources of funding for the project after the state. And then they entered into a long-term arrangement where a tribal member took a seat on the library board of directors. And then we, as the architect, changed the building design to incorporate this partnership. So in this case, I think it was a really successful partnership, one that I think helps everyone in the community feel like they're moving forward together in a real positive way. I think it's a great idea for library districts or municipalities to try and partner with the tribal communities as well as with everyone else in the community. In this case, the tribal community, of course, is its own governing agency with their own funding, and they were able to form a partnership.
So my other part of the question was, you've seen the piece of land we have, and I'm sure you have begun visualizing ideas, but we're going to need some kind of solid picture or something to show people to encourage them to want to vote for this and want it in their community. So are you going to have some kind of picture that we can show out there? Because people are very visual, and you just don't want to leave it up them just to think we're just going to get a prison looking building or something like that.
No, I think you're right. That's a great idea. And I think if my recommendation would be, if the library is to proceed with an LCFA, that we would work with Pierce County Library to develop those materials really collaboratively with the library, making sure that we're sending the right visual message, that we're stating things in the most positive way to assist the process.
Yeah, I think it's really important in all library design, and you can definitely see the results in some of the examples we showed. The feedback from the community really affects what the building looks like. So we come to the table and we're like, we have a lot of ideas, and then we hear the community's feedback and we're like, we have even better ideas now. And so it's the cyclical process of how can we start the conversation with an image that inspires and sparks excitement, and then know that it's still open-ended, that there is room for more personalization, I guess.
Okay, good. I think you're getting my idea that we need something to use as a sales tool to actually get the whole community behind us, because we're going to need to go out door to door, talk to people, talk to everyone we know. And the first thing they're going to want to do is have an idea of how something could possibly look at that end of town and fit in with us. So I know I'm not expecting all the actual drawings, because I do want you to respond to the community, but just something that we can use to inspire people to go ahead and want to put this in their budget. So thank you.
Very good. Yes, we agree. You're definitely going to need that. That's a great idea.
Councilmember Cole.
I didn't raise my hand, but I do have a question. So one of the pictures that we saw here was of an area, a reading area that was facing the street, and there were people reading. Like, yes, that I think it's beautiful. I actually usually will check out a book and then I take it home and read it. But that seems so inviting to me. But I'm a very safety conscious person, and my only question is, and it's probably a weird one, but are those windows, or would they be bulletproof?
In this case, no. That is a concern for some communities. When we start a library project, we have an engagement process. We listen to what people are concerned about. I think one of the things that any library needs to do is provide a range of places to sit, some of which, like this, might be, in this case, this library is about 4 feet off the ground because we're in a FEMA floodplain up in McConnell. And so we're required to lift the building 4 feet above upgrade. So you're kind of sitting up in the air, and it feels, and if you're interested to be in that spot, it feels good. But there should be in other spaces in the library where you can sit and be not exposed or feel that you're more enclosed. I think that's really necessary. I think, safety, there's a whole range of safety concerns with any library project. And it takes a lot of thinking to find the best solutions to address them to the best way possible.
And I think that, a similar concern came up on our Skyway Library, which community members had other thoughts like that. A library has multiple sides to it. And one of the amazing things about this site in Sumner is the views to Mount Rainier that we have from the site. And so then we think about, well, what would it be like to sit and be able to see the mountain? What would it be able to sit in that part of the library and see? At the Skyway Library, there were some concerns from parents about the children in the teen areas being up against the main street windows and things like that. And so we located those spaces on the far side of the building where it's not going to be as visible in for people driving by or seeing who's sitting there. So I think that, again, the community outreach portion of this is going to be really helpful. And safety for us and for the library system, I know, is a big concern.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead, Gretchen.
Thanks. I'd just like to add additional information. Building Work has been our architects providing professional services for a variety of projects. Our hope was for them to share some of their experiences to kind of whet our appetites for what's possible with new modern libraries. So we are pretty premature to be at the stage where we would be discussing the details of this particular project. One is also how the funding works for providing a full-scale architectural work on designing the new library. So all of those things would be certainly very important for the process. As our attorney Dan mentioned earlier, we're also on a really tight timeline for considering any ballot measures in this year. And I, as the library director, would also just be a little concerned about holding up some parts of the process that we could also work on in really a full committing to the design process that would include all of that public engagement and be able to take our time to get it right, as opposed to putting something out now that then people will say that's what it's going to look like. It's going to look like Skyway and I like it or I don't like it. We run some risks with that. So I appreciate just letting me kind of chime in there that there would be a lot of work to do to really bring all of those voices into the design project. And we're so lucky that we've been working with a great team at Building Work on a variety of projects, big and small. And so we appreciate them being able to share some of those experiences tonight.
Councilmember Potato.
I was just wondering, with 20,000 square feet, would you need to have a second story or would you place that all on the one floor?
I think in the case of the site at Sumner, that it could be a one-story building. Sometimes with larger libraries, we do look at multi-story libraries. There is an additional infrastructure cost, elevators, stairs, and things that need to be added to the project if we go on 2 stories. But it does appear that this site in Sumner could handle a library on 1 story of up to 20,000 square feet.
Thank you.
Just want to say that I've loved looking at these. They're so inspiring. But my question relates to, have you had experience working on green buildings? I'm thinking in terms of, cost maintenance and just climate change, like solar panels, but also storing and harvesting of runoff water and, maybe other things.
Oh, absolutely. It's a great question. I mean, it's central to every building project well, I like to use the term environmentally responsive design. Sustainable design is a term that's been used for a long time, but it's kind of been used so much, we're not really sure what it means. I think the idea is that any new building, but particularly a community-oriented building, should be environmentally responsive in a whole range of ways. Stormwater management, on-site power generation from photovoltaics, so the use of daylighting, natural healthy materials. It really is a central aspect of any library project design.
Mr. Brown.
Yeah. What is the size of the existing library?
What's the size of,
The size, Gretchen, you may know that.
The current branch is 10,000 and change square feet. I'm sorry, I have to just look it up. I don't recall the exact number, but it's about 10,000 square feet. $10,600.
Ms. Patel, did you have more? No. I think it's probably back to Gretchen.
Before I get to Gretchen, I just want to say, there's going to be extensive public engagement as we move through this process. A lot of this does come down to timing, right? The library and the city, we have to work together to come up with what the vision is. But it's really going to be up to the voters at the end of the day, whether or not they want to fund this. So it's kind of chicken and the egg. Which one do you do first? And I know that the library's been working hard and trying to already solicit feedback from the community to gain interest in that. So this is the fun part, though, is getting to talk about what we all want to see in a library, but we got to get there in the next few months. So turn over Gretchen, and this is we'll talk about LCFAs.
Thank you, Matt and Kate. They also were helping us with our open houses here in Sumner. So they're very well versed in our process here. Thanks a lot for being here tonight.
you're welcome. Thanks for having us.
So as a part of our research in understanding the technicalities of a library capital facility area, we have been consulting extensively with Pierce County Elections. And some of the important things that we've learned about drawing the boundaries for an LCFA is that they would need to be contiguous and they need to be identifiable in a way that either aligns with other existing boundaries. So they can align with precincts or school district boundaries. We can use congressional districts, whatever a formalized boundary exists, we can leverage. In consultation with Jason, with our staff, and with Pierce County Elections, we have kind of narrowed in on precincts will give us maximum flexibility. And so we have a couple of different opportunities to discuss with you tonight. And we have run some financial scenarios using the precincts in a variety of presentations we'll go through here shortly to understand what some opportunities and impacts would be for those. Which, do you want to take this?
So I think not a problem. So one of the challenges we have is our urban growth area does not align well with the voting precincts. So in all the maps you have in front of you, yellow is the city limits and it's outlined in red. And then you have this other blue line, not to be confused with the two rivers running through it. It's more straight and it runs through the gray portions. That is our UGA. So that's our urban growth area. That's also, some people refer to that as our potential annexation area. That's where we could annex at some point and they would be part of our corporate city limits. And then the gray areas are the different voting precincts. And I wish there was a good way to overlay this in a nice aerial photo, but it really was not that easy. But for a point of reference for those of you that are familiar with Sumner, I don't know if I have a pointer. I'm not going to be able to. If you look up in the, oh, thank you, Jeff. Jeff is being my Vanna White over here. If you go in the northeast quadrant, there's a little piece that sticks out. Jeff, if you can go down into the blue right there. That is Alago for our council members. So that's at the top of Sumner Taps Highway and Forest Canyon where they come together. The other areas of in the urban growth area that might be interesting to you is down south. There's a little pocket just south of Winco Foods that is in our urban growth area. That's not the big gray area, but that little blue blue box right there where the mouse is. And then if you go out to the west, out around our Sumner Cemetery, there's an urban growth area out there that really is between Houston Road and the cemetery itself. So these are the areas we looked at.
Councilmember Newman.
Jason, in the Lake Taps, Derringer School District area, do you have any idea how, like, of those with like high school students, how many people in like the Derringer School District like go to Sumner High School versus Bonnie Lake High School?
I don't. I can tell you, for those of you that aren't familiar, Derringer School District is a K-8 district. And they have a choice when they are going to high school. They can go to any high school they want. So they can go to Sumner, Bonnie Lake, and go to Auburn, then go to White River. They really could go anywhere that their parents are willing to get them to. I've heard anecdotally that many of them end up at Sumner High School.
I was just wondering how that affects in terms of the downsides about whether they associate with Sumner or not.
Sure.
Like it improves our odds if majority of them are going to high school here instead of somewhere else.
Sure. I think that's a good segue. And if we could go through these three scenarios and then we can openly discuss how to move forward. So option one, this is the most basic one. It's all of Sumner city limits. As I just mentioned, the pros, it is the most familiar. Obviously, if you live in this area, you identify with the city of Sumner. Some of the challenges, as Gretchen mentioned, the county would strongly prefer that the boundary of the LCFA run contiguous. And where that's an issue is out at our cemetery, we have that area in between that is not incorporated into the city, as well as if you go up Eli Hill, up 410, the city owns some land on the east side of the freeway there that it used to be part of our water system. It still is part of our water system. There's actually no residents that are living in that block right now. And there's obviously no living residents living at our cemetery right now. So those are both two areas that don't have people. There's no residences in those. Their challenge, as several of you mentioned, that this does not necessarily reflect the service area of the library. It is a draw for the greater area. So that's one of the challenges there. Option two, this is Sumner city limits plus part of our UGA. And that is these blocks of orange on the screen. So the pros, it does create the contiguous LCFA boundary, and it incorporates areas that are typically, they identify as Sumner without encroaching on our neighboring cities. So that's one of the other areas, and Gretchen can probably speak to this better than I can, but if we go too far outside, we make this LCFA too large, you have Bonnie Lake, obviously that has library needs. You have Ording that has library needs, Edgewood that has library needs. It could make this a more difficult ballot measure to pass. As you can see here, going up into part of our UGA, that doesn't even cover all of our UGA. And that's because if you were to take, I'm going to actually just borrow Jeff's mouse. This is the challenge about being virtual sometimes. So one of the challenges is this voting precinct is much larger and extends way past the UGA. And you see that also on the north up there. So what we did was try to get the most, when we were looking at these precincts, we wanted precincts that incorporated as much of the UGA as possible. And that's why that's going up Forest Canyon. We have a bunch of new residents, new houses up there that are served by Sumner Sewer. So they are familiar with the city. They are connected to the city in that manner. And then option three, this is the city limits plus all precincts that include the UGA. So any precinct that touches UGA was included here. So once again, it does create that contiguous boundary that we're looking for. It does incorporate all of the UGA. The challenges though, it does go fairly far past the UGA, and When you ask the folks that are living particularly up around Lake Tapps, what community they identify with, it could be us, it could be Bonnie Lake, it could be Lake Tapps, or it could be Auburn, it's part of Lakeland. So it does become challenging at that point. The white spot is actually not the lake, it's a different precinct. The lake is some of the, yeah, it sticks kind of out into there, and I can pull up an aerial if we need to. So the library was able to work with the county and pull the number of registered voters in each one of these areas. So we'll go through the top line, which is just the city limits only. Right now, there's 6,365 registered voters. The last general election in 2022 in November, 3,962 votes were cast. So applying that validation rule that Mr. Gottlieb talked about, 40% would need to vote in the August election. That's 1,585. Out of those, you would need 60% plus 1 yes votes for the measure to pass. Obviously, that 60% column changes based on the number of votes actual cast, but assuming you only had 40% turnout, that is what it would result in. And you can see we did this with option 2 and 3 as well. And I'll turn back over to Gretchen to talk about the levy rates.
So using the precincts, we were able to pull market assessed valuation for those 3 different options. And then calculating an assumption of the maximum of a $15 million bond, knowing that we can still choose to go 14, 13, that is to be determined. We figured we know for the scope of this project, that would be the maximum from a public bond that would needed for this project. And so calculating out that bond amount over the valuation using that formula, we were able to share the levy rates and an annual cost, which just dividing that into a monthly, you can see the different potential tax impacts of a maximum amount that could go on a ballot measure to fund this project. We are using the same figures that were used for the medium home value that you all have used as well through your budget process in the last year.
So I think at this point, we'd be interested to hear what the library trustees and the city council feel are the next steps if you do want to create LCFA, what that area specifically looks like. Is it option 1, 2, or 3, or something completely different that we haven't considered? So I'll turn it back over to the mayor for questions.
Councilmember Potato.
I say no to 3. I just think it goes too far. And I would be inclined to really go with the Sumner city limits. The difference in price, is $20, $18 that the voter would, or the property owners would have to pay. But I just think that, you would have much better buy-in if you're sticking local and people can really identify with what the boundaries are.
All right. Councilmember Newman.
Thank you. First of all, Gretchen, you said there was polling in the field at some point, I believe.
We do general public opinion polling annually as a practice. So this is not strategic political polling at all.
Okay.
But we will be able to extract the Sumner zip codes to at least just get a sense of what general sentiment is for the library. And we'll be sharing that with our board at the March meeting, and I'm happy to pass along all of that information.
Okay, but that wouldn't include input from the precincts outside.
Correct. We had to start that process a number of months ago. And so that is wrapping up for the March meeting.
Okay, thanks. And then has anyone also looked at the cost of campaigning to a larger area to voters and like the saturation rate of materials that you would have to send to an expanded space? Like if we were to, in other words, if you were to adopt like option number 3, how much more challenge, how much larger does that campaign need to be? Because you'll need more saturation presumably outside of the Sumner area to get through to those who don't identify with Sumner. Like, I don't know, and I don't know if anyone's looked at, you know, like campaign evaluation on that.
We have not gone to that level of detail. This information on the 3 options is pretty fresh and pretty recent. And I would also, just to clarify, you know, we have some public information that we would be sharing that would be information only. So campaigning can mean different things to different people. And so we don't have any information about anything that might be happening outside of that. But we do have budgets for direct mailer. The public information is up on the, you know, we'll continue to update our website. There'll be certain basic activities in consultation with the attorney to make sure we're neutral in the language and getting information out.
And Jason, sorry, so you said the 2022 voter turnout in numbers. I think, are those August numbers or November numbers?
Those are November numbers because we have to validate to the last general election.
Okay, so you have to validate to that election, but about the 40% is what we would need like what September, does it change? The requirement doesn't change then for September versus November?
No, but
But the
if we were to wait, let's say you put it on in August, and my understanding, Gretchen, correct me if I'm wrong here, if we wait until February, then you'd be validating to November 23's election.
Yes.
So right now, the consideration that the library is asking us to go, or the timeline that the library is asking us for, is to put this on the August ballot, which would mean we'd be validating to the last general. If for some reason it didn't pass in August and you put it on to November, you're still validating to the last November 22.
Okay, thanks.
Anybody else? Go ahead.
My head only turns. It's just me here, I suppose.
Thank you.
So my question relates to Jason or Gretchen. The 31880, that is that part of Lake Taps, right? So I was wondering if there's any information. It seems to me that the only grocery store up there is like that Hagen, and a lot of the Lake Taps people do tend to shop at the Fred Meyer. I'm wondering if they also use the YMCA, and so then they might be more inclined to come this way and then also have an interest in the library. Lake Taps doesn't have a library. So I sort of feel like I like that area, but I wasn't so sure about the 31889. That's more of the Bonnie Lake. Is it? Am I off with that? That down the bottom.
Yeah, 31889 is actually all in the valley floor, and it's south of Winco between the Ording Highway and kind of
Oh, okay.
going up. So if
Oh,
you're familiar with like Knutson Farms is out
Oh,
there
okay,
right now.
yeah. Okay. I don't really know much about that, but I was thinking that, you know, the other one, especially because it's such an easy, they've got that Lake Tap Sumner road that goes straight into. So I feel like that one has some potential. I don't really know anything about the other one. Though. And then, so the other, actually, I did have another question. The 25873 all the way west, would they be more inclined to use a Puyallup library? Is that closer to them?
So 25873 is between Houston Road, which is by the old Cannery Furniture Warehouse,
Oh,
out to our cemetery.
okay. I'm
So
way off.
I believe that they are very tied to Sumner.
Yeah.
They
okay.
are our water they are in our water service area and our sewer customers.
Yeah. And then did you say Edgewood was or wasn't included?
Edgewood is not included, so Edgewood would be just west or to the left of the city limits on all these maps.
Okay, because I live in Edgewood and I know that in the south end, almost all the people in the south end tend to use the Sumner Library.
I believe it.
Thank you.
Councilmember Stewart.
Thank you, Mayor. just a couple of questions. I guess I should maybe mention that I'm a big believer in people who use services ought to pay for it. I'm not even going to talk about the drive-through traffic that goes to Ording. But I'm curious, Jason, on this map. I know a lot of people that live south of the river. And a lot of them, most of them probably are a Puyallup mail address. So they're considered part of the city of Puyallup as far as their voting precincts. Is that correct?
It's a little bit hard because it kind of go, if you imagine the Ording Highway, the precincts to the east of the Ording Highway are in Legislative District 31. Okay, so they're probably 98390 zip codes, I would assume. If you go west of the Ording Highway, those are in the 25th Legislative District, probably going to be Puyallup at that point. Especially when you think about going up Military Road, up over towards Pioneer. Those are, I know in Puyallup, just can't say for sure what the zip code is of the precinct, which is directly south of the river there.
Okay. Oh, and do you know how this area lines up? If we were to overlay a map of the school district boundaries. And I know that we go clear up to Bonnie Lake and it's a combined school district. But it seems to me that there's a lot of people, a lot of families that I know that live in that area, like right under this square, whose children go to Sumner High School or to the middle school in town. Is there a way that we can sync up that? Or is that goes beyond the whole scope of the whatever the acronym is?
Yeah, so yes and no. So we can look at the school districts. Right now, all of the proposals include districts that are precincts that are either in the Sumner and Bonnie Lake School District or the Derringer School District. None of the proposals in front of you include the Puyallup School District. It would be inappropriate for us to say, let's put the LCFA over the Sumner Bonnie Lake School District because of how big it is and negative impacts to Bonnie Lake and Tahale and those areas that are looking for libraries.
Okay.
I think Gretchen might want to.
And just to add, those folks may not know that Puyallup is not incorporated into the PCLS boundaries. They are a separate entity. So Puyallup is not an area that we can really consider.
Okay, well, yeah, I didn't think it was. I just recognize that the families that I know that have school age children, if they're going to go off to a library, they're going to come to Sumner. They'll probably be closer to it than I will be. Maybe not, but that's okay. So a question, Gretchen, for you, you still use library cards? Like if I went, I've got 2 library cards, one I thought I lost. So when a person goes into the library, whether it's the new one or the existing one, do they get a library to help them be able to check out books and videos and all that stuff?
Yes, and we do associate a home library in the system. So we have the ability to run some data. We also track how much materials are borrowed from around the district. There's a lot of fields in our database that we can look at. One of the advantages of a larger system like ours is the economies of scale across the whole system. So, Sumner residents might be getting books that come from University Place or Gig Harbor. So there's still some sharing that might happen. Also, people are allowed to borrow from wherever. So as Trustee Patel had mentioned, living in Edgewood, we have a library also in Milton, so she can use any of those libraries. I would say pretty soundly, Sumner is used by Sumner residents, and certainly we anticipate a new location that's off of that main artery would likely have heavier use by the residents who are closer into the town. So we could certainly look at some of that data. We did a couple of years ago. But the pandemic has kind of turned all of our data upside down, if I'm honest, and we really haven't had enough time to stabilize yet. We're still really settling back into and trying to track what those trends have changed to, if that helps.
Yeah, thank you. And I probably shouldn't even ask that question because I probably knew the answer to it. Thank you for that.
Shame on you.
Councilmember-
Well, I'd like to hear other
Councilmember,
people hear from Gretchen. She's a good talker. And I got one more question. I haven't turned my mic off. I guess if you're looking for recommendations, I'm for option 3 because I really feel like people who use the library should help pay the price. That's it. Thank you.
thank you, Councilmember Stewart. Councilmember Reed.
Thank you, Mayor. It's a tough one between 2 and 3, because I know, it'd be much easier and cleaner to just use the city limits, but we know that the users are coming from a much broader surrounding area. I think option 2 best represents the closest we can come with the parameters that are set for us as far as what we can and can't ask for. I don't think it's all inclusive, but I think that's a better representation of the users. And I'm also, if you're looking for direction or council mindset, I'm also more toward the 15,000 square foot size, because that's a 50% increase over the existing. It might give a little more options with the use of the property, but I know it's still early for that process. There's still a lot of pieces to that. I also have some other concerns, especially with the ability to get this passed. And I mentioned this back in December with our discussion. I've been in support of the library changing the changes that have been proposed going back to 2016, 2017, the purchase and exchanges of property, and in favor of that every step of the way. The concern I have is that during those stages of the process, this project was presented as not one that was going to be a tax district. It was presented as it was going to be done through fundraising. And I think that is going to be a big challenge to pass on to the voters in this district, especially after, we just recently had one of the largest city tax increases on the city portion of tax. The school district's going to be coming back for another phase in short term. There are a lot of external threats to being able to get this bond passed that I think really need a lot of attention. You can certainly, throw it together and get it out there for August, but I got a feeling a lot more work is going to be needed. And I could be wrong, but to have a successful run for this coming August, I think there's a lot of groundwork that's going to be needed to get it considered.
Councilmember Botetto.
So on option 2, if you included the UGA areas, do you know how many people that includes, or how many voters are likely to be? Is that the extra, 8,400 is rather than 6,365? But
Yeah, and this kind of goes to answer your question. Though we never ran the whole UGA because it doesn't line up with the precincts, right?
yeah,
So looking at precinct 31880, which is the orange block on option 2, kind of on the north there. That incorporates a large part of the UGA, but not all of the UGA. And it also then extends out into unincorporated Pierce County. So option 2 includes that, and then the other blocks in orange on there.
Yeah.
So there's no way to
really.
just capture what the UGA itself is, but I do want to make a point. Let's say council decided to go with just option 1, city limits proper. And at some point during the life of the bonds, these areas annex. It's our understanding that they would then be subject to the LCFA tax at that point when they annex.
Oh, okay. So you don't have to
No.
declare that they would be there. So, okay.
Anybody else? Deputy Mayor Hochstetter.
I'll just say that this is a really near and dear project to my heart. When I ran for city council the first time in 2008, my stance was that we would work on moving the library to a more walkable space and more in the center of town. So my first goal will be to get this on the ballot for the citizens to decide. So I just think that we will individually, as a council, we will go and have meetings with the mayor and the city administrator to thoroughly ask every question and get a really good understanding, because there's more to putting things on ballots than just precincts. You need to look at the amount of people who are willing to come out and vote and validate your election. So I'm hoping each council member will really ask all their questions and understand this thoroughly, and that we can then we'll have one more study session to come to a conclusion. I think it's just premature, just looking at maps just right off the bat. I think there's just really behind the scene details that we all need to flesh out a little bit for ourselves. So it's just so exciting to see those beautiful libraries and to think that our community might have that, because it's going to just make a world of difference to the other side of town. It's going to make an economic development that's going to make us blossom and connect our city as a whole. So we're just going to continue to work, and I'm going to try to help everybody come to a good decision if I can help. So thank you for everybody's work and time on this.
Thank you. Councilmember Newman.
Sorry, to that point, like Jason, I'm not gonna weigh on preferred options until I have a chance to go through and look at how the difference between the precincts in 2 and 3 and how the either included or excluded precincts have voted on previous like fire levies and school levies, like to figure out whether it improves or harms our chances, like in lieu of like lack of any other information and no judgment. I don't want to look at a map and just get like we could be sinking ourselves or we could be improving it, and that's the only indicator that I can think of right now if we don't have our own information. Anyway, so I have to look at that data before I have an opinion on which one is our best shot. That's all.
I really echo what Councilperson Newman said. I would like that data as well, because I think there is probably a trend there with how people vote in the past, these bonds and levies and things. But I feel like I'm leaning towards 2.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Nope. Councilmember Reed, there you are.
Sorry, I had one follow-up in relation to those responses. I just urge caution in the way that those districts are evaluated and the parallels that could arise in the way that Pierce Transit handled Proposition 1 back when we ended up exiting the transit district. So I understand it's important to know the voting trends, but I think that it's very cautious and very fine line between the actual users and the ones that are going to be paying for this project. So that's all.
All right. Mr. Brown.
Yeah, I'm not ready. I need more.
Anybody else? Lisa?
Sure. So next steps. As we've mentioned several times, we have to kind of work backwards. If the library's goal is to put this on the ballot in August, they need to meet the May filing deadline. Before that, the Pierce County Council has to take action, and before the Pierce County Council can take action, both the Sumner City Council as well as the Library Board of Trustees need to take action and pass resolutions. So we have tentatively scheduled this for Sumner City Council action on Monday, March 6th. We do have a study session on the 27th that we'll be bringing this to for kind of further discussion, but we would need direction at that council meeting in order for us to have the resolution ready for your consideration a week later. And Gretchen, do you want to speak to the library timeline?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Our board, we have a placeholder on March 8th at our March regular meeting as well. And we've been discussing this monthly, I think since I started. And just kind of with respect to expand on the walking back timeline here from the August election, in our research of what tools are available to us to build a building that's going to cost up to $19 million, this is a tool. So if we look ahead to when our agreement expires for our current property, which is 2024, we have a timeline that we're working with as well. And so that is a consideration around a sense of perceived urgency of why we're doing this now. Is as the new director, I also understand we have commitments with you, and some of those expire. We appreciate that. We hope we can lean on you for flexibility as things move forward. But we do also understand that we can't stay there forever. And as well as the building continues to age, we don't intend to continue to spend maintenance on repairs if it's at its end of life and it's intended to be redeveloped by the city, as we don't own that property anymore. So the library itself is in a position to say, this is a timeline that we have to work with, that we can try to use a tool that's available to us. If that is unsuccessful, we will have to take a new track as well to understand what other options are available, which would, we assume, include lease options to move out of that property. It takes a lot of work and a lot of time to close down a library, and we would not want to do that if we didn't have something else open. And so, part of my role is also to look not just ahead to the next few months, but the next few years. And so I hope that also just may address something I haven't heard anyone ask, but I heard Councilman Reed, for example, around how much work needs to happen. We certainly recognize that. And that is why this has bumped to the top of the priority list for me since I started in my position, is recognizing that time waits for no man. And so we're doing everything we can to move this project forward in the spirit of partnership and recognizing everything that the city of Sumner has brought to this project and to working with the library. And I felt that was important to mention, is that we're also just looking into the years ahead as well.
All right, if I have no other questions, then I will call on city administrator for his report. No report? All right. Then I will say meeting adjourned.
And the time is
The time is
7:40.